From the Venture Accelerator at UCLA Anderson, Accelerate, an entrepreneurship podcast, hosted by entrepreneur in residence, Rod Kurz.
What does a global pandemic mean for a global economy? Welcome to Accelerate, a new podcast from the Venture Accelerator at UCLA Anderson. I'm Rod Kurz, entrepreneur in residence. The world is more interconnected than ever, and under normal circumstances, that can be a good thing for entrepreneurs. Global customers, global talent, global supply chain. But the COVID-19 pandemic has thrown a wrench in all that and left us with a lot of questions. Our next two guests are the perfect people to answer them. Dinesh Moorjani is a serial tech entrepreneur, CEO, and investor. He was the founder and CEO of Hatch Labs, co-founder of Tinder, served as an advisor to the global private equity firm Warburg Pincus, and has held leadership roles at IAC and Samsung in both the US and Asia. We're also proud to have him as a member of the UCLA Anderson faculty. A native of Sweden, Per Welinder came to the US at the age of 18 as a professional skateboarder, in fact, a two-time world champion in freestyle. After managing his own career, he approached fellow skate legend Tony Hawk with a business plan, and the rest is history. The two of them went on to found Birdhouse Skateboards, which would become the industry leader. He's co-founded a number of other lifestyle brands over the years, and today he serves as general partner for Welinder Shi Capital, a specialty fund focused on lifestyle, tech, and culture. He's also a proud Anderson alum and is active in the Accelerator. Gentlemen, it's great to see you. Thanks for joining us remotely, of course.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm really looking forward to the conversation because, as I mentioned at the top, you both have such a great global perspective, and when dealing with a global issue like that, like the one we're dealing with, I think it's really helpful, and I'm sure the audience is going to appreciate that. So Dinesh, I want to start with you. We're what I've started calling new pandemic friends. We met because of this situation, and I'm thankful for it. I wish we could be doing it in person, but I want to start with kind of the elephant in the room question. COVID-19, how are you doing personally and professionally through all this?
We're doing well. Thanks for asking. We feel fortunate that no one in our family has been ill, although we do know of folks that have been recovering from COVID. So we feel blessed. The overall impact of COVID has been unprecedented, and happy to share more thoughts about the global impact if you're curious.
Yeah, speak on. I guess start with your own, ventures and investments. You mentioned off air that you're working on a number of deals right now. So it sounds like you've kept pushing.
We have. Maybe to step back and take a macro view. It is an unprecedented time for multi-generations. It's tested the human condition. It's tested our resolve as a country and as many people on Earth, and our commitment to one another. It's even forced us to look in the mirror due to the residual second-order impacts of COVID that's affected the hygiene coefficient in developed countries and developing countries, with those that are disenfranchised or don't have a voice. Internationally, I think other countries have been doing better based on the objective data than the U.S. to date. Although we're talking about a short period of time, a few months, so longitudinal data will ultimately tell if we recover from this. But if you look at COVID cases, the resulting mortality ratios, I don't think we're doing that well. And it stems from the collective action of people and the government policies that have been put in place that seem perhaps mixed. We're also an individualistic culture in the US as opposed to collectivist culture that you see in many regions around the globe, particularly in Asia. And that's also impacted our ability to act in concert to address this. But there are a lot of silver linings. It's demonstrated our resilience, our resolve, our ability to prioritize what's important. For private companies as investors, they've been able to do more with less. They've been able to refocus on the things that really matter inside those companies. They've become much better operators of their P&L and managing their balance sheet and cash flows. And as a result, we found some of the most disciplined operators emerging during this time, and it's a great time to be investing in disruption in technology, and that's why we've been very active investors.
Well, that is a great encapsulation, and you hit on a lot of themes that we're going to be digging deeper on. But I appreciate that recap, and again that global look, which I think is an important part of the conversation. Per, over to you. We're old friends at this point, and we've been keeping in touch during this. So I know you're safe and well, and still skating and still investing. But what's life look like for you?
Well, on the personal side, very fortunate as well. My wife and I are healthy. Our family. My parents and her parents are healthy. Our kids are healthy. So all good there. I'm very blessed with that. And on a global scale, have had friends as well who's been having it, and in many cases very lightly. So it seems like there seem to be various versions of this virus that can hit people differently. And that's the unknown, I think, is the most scary part. And I know a lot of decimation is happening on a lot of levels, but I always also try to look at the positive. I think we as a human race, at least I like to think that we think more in a compassionate way now. And I think Dinesh hit on it in terms of America. I mean, I love America, but the challenge you have, the individualistic is what brought me here, the freedom and the opportunity. But sometimes that makes it difficult for us to work as one country. So it's kind of a challenge to the foundation of America and the United States. So that makes me feel a little bit bad, because I always say, hey, you got to wave the flag. And now, people point at us, meaning part of America, that we should be doing a better job on caring for others. If it's not wearing a mask for myself, it's for someone else. On the business side, I've seen both sides. One where people step back and really try to slow down, maybe a little bit of furloughing, and others just keep going. And I can see the reason why someone want to just keep going, because they want to keep a momentum. But I am more of a frugal personality in the businesses I ran, so I tend to prefer people that take a step back, because we don't know how long this will last. Even now, we would have thought 2 months ago things would look better. So that's a huge challenge, being an investor and being supportive of the management teams of what's the right thing, what the right thing is to do. But I can see the positive that I see is the fact of being able to use video like this. It actually makes people more productive. You create a project, you finish a project. You create another project, and you finish a project. So I think people that are comfortable working under these circumstances, it is actually beneficial. And on the pure selfish standpoint, I think, just like you mentioned earlier, Rod, this is the time when you really need to step on the gas in terms of thinking strategically, because I've always looked at business as a chess game mixed with hockey. So the chess game is you got to think, you got to strategize, but then you got to go. And now, more than ever, is business faster than it's ever been. I would say in the last few months, more changes have occurred, certainly in the business world, than in the prior 5. So it's exciting times, but also really worrying times for humanity.
Well, that is among the best metaphors I've heard. Chess mixed with hockey. I'm gonna borrow that down the road. But Dinesh, I want to, we're sort of talking about the macro level and this idea of pushing and investing and still trying to grow. But on a more micro level, just day to day, have there been any productivity hacks that you've discovered? Are you enjoying the time at home? More time with the family, whatever it might be. How are you literally getting by through this, and what has been sort of a net positive as a result?
On a personal level, number one, you're saving on commute time. So when you talk about efficiency and hacks, one of the things we always try to do as professionals, where we're strapped for time, time being the most elastic asset, but is the most constrained in our day. If we can get back, whether it's 15 minutes or it's an hour commuting to one place to another, we have that back. The challenge is that you're on video calls sort of all day and sometimes into the night if you're dealing with international locations, and you can run into some sort of video or Zoom fatigue. And so overcoming that can be challenging. One of the tricks I use is if I don't have to be on video, I'm not showcasing something, I'm not using the virtual whiteboards, etc., I'll often just do a walk and talk. I used to do that before in the office. It's something I encourage my team to do in our Santa Monica office and in other offices, especially in New York City, where it's beautiful. If you can build relationships with an entrepreneur, you're talking through a concept, and it's a strategic thinking effort, even with all the distractions around you. It allows you to have a casual conversation. It's disarming, and at the same time, you're getting some exercise. So walk and talks were already part of my toolkit, and I'd say I'm using them even more often. Number one, we do it socially distanced, and we're wearing masks, so we're trying to follow all the appropriate guidelines, but that's very effective. And it's particularly useful when you're on calls where you don't have to be on video. So there are a bunch of other things that we're doing, but I'd say that's the main one that's been really effective.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up. It's such an important point. It's something I've been preaching probably over the past month as pandemic and Zoom fatigue have set in. I actually did a session with the latest cohort at the accelerator yesterday, and that was one of my opening slides. I said, remember phone calls? You know, we didn't always have to be in person prior to all this. I don't know why we feel like we have to be on camera all day, every day. And I do find that sometimes, if I'm even just pacing around my apartment, I'm thinking a little more clearly. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Per, I don't know if the equivalent is skate and talk for you, but what are some of the hacks and discoveries you've made about working through this?
Well, it's a very basic one. Living in the LA area, if I go to meet you, for example, I schedule one meeting in one day.
Yep.
So now the nice part about Zoom, as well as Dinesh was saying, we don't have to have the camera on, and I've also used the phone a lot more lately. So I become more effective. But the challenge is I love work, and I have, my partner's now in Sydney, born and raised in Beijing. I have my friends in Sweden and one of our advisors in Switzerland. So you have to work all day. So you have to kind of make those decisions. But the only hack I have is the people I meet in the, LA area that I would usually drive to, because I like to meet in person. Especially when it comes to pulling in investors into your fund, but of course entrepreneurs as well. I miss that, and that's the one that is very difficult to replace. But I feel a little bit more efficient because I can set up 2 or 3 meetings in one day.
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out too, and this is something I've struggled with and tried to remind myself, if you're wearing a mask and you're outside and you're 10 feet away from someone, it's probably okay, especially if it's someone you trust. So I'm trying to have a little more in-person interaction these days as well, because, we're all going a little stir crazy. I have sort of joked that, we're in the awkward teenager phase of this, where we still don't quite know what we're doing. And we're like, avoid people at all costs. And we always have to be on Zoom. And, we need to learn to live with this, I think is a theme. I think you both pointed out that this is here to stay. It's something I've been saying, and, we just have to adjust accordingly. I want to jump back to the global question, Dinesh, and, get your perspective on the fact, I think you both pointed it out earlier, that we're struggling in the U.S. here, and it is different here than the rest of the world. How does that influence your approach to business, your approach to investing, your approach potentially on global investment versus domestic? We are in a different category right now, and it doesn't look like we're turning the corner anytime soon. So how do you approach that against the backdrop of the rest of the world that is back in restaurants and having somewhat normal life?
Yeah, look, I think it does shift some of our prioritization, but it's a function of what our time horizon is on our investments. By the nature of being venture capital investors, we have a very long time horizon, and we're patient capital at our fund. So if something takes 10 years to become a large standalone enduring company, that's okay. And oftentimes those time horizons will dwarf any short-term blips in business challenges, et cetera. So by taking that long view, I think the things that we spend time thinking about aren't dramatically affected by COVID. In fact, some of our portfolio companies have seen a huge tailwind because of COVID in the healthcare space or the delivery space, et cetera, and others that have been challenged to have the cash to be able to manage it. So obviously we're looking at the way people work. I think that has fundamentally changed and will have residual effects over time. I think this has accelerated digital transformation for many companies because they're so reliant on digital technologies to engage with one another, to engage with their customers, channel partners, their ecosystem, their suppliers, even their investors, for public and private companies. And so there's a lot of automation and technology that improves our human connection. In many ways, if you step back to the birth of the internet, I think most of the use cases, oftentimes they were consumer oriented, were about making connections between individuals or entities easier. And that theme has persisted over decades. Even Tinder, which we co-founded in 2012, was about making social discovery easier. And so I don't think that theme is disappearing. Collaborative communication and how systems and machines talk to each other, as well as how individuals talk to each other, is a persistent theme. It's just that it evolves over time. And I think COVID has put a magnifying glass on looking out for those opportunities, whether it's in telemedicine or it's in automation workflows between companies so APIs can talk to each other. So we're looking at all of that across enterprise and vertical SaaS with our investments, as well as consumer products and services that make it easier for people to connect with things as well as people to do what they want to do to make them happy.
Well said. Well said. Per, same question to you. I mean, you were global in your focus prior to this. You have investments in brands all over the world. You mentioned your partner is overseas. So has this changed anything for you? Has it accelerated anything for you?
Well, the short term is a challenge, especially when you work with physical goods. So anything being made in China, which we all know have the incredible supply chain of just about any hard goods product or apparel or footwear. So that is a huge challenge. And we do see when you're smaller, you don't get the voice. It's the big companies that get the production times. And then, of course, the geopolitical thing does not make it easier at all. And some manufacturing can easily shift over to countries like Vietnam or Indonesia. But others, China has such a grip on it that it makes it very, very challenging. So although the pandemic, we also believe, being a long-term investor as a specialty VC fund, it is a concern where we can see it could be challenging with China for quite some time here. And those are things that we're basically handcuffed. We have really no control of that. And you're just hoping that you have some good problem solvers in management and that look for solutions that are makeshift at worst, but also very good at best for the longer term. So we try to be supportive and understanding of that challenge, with China being so powerful in the manufacturing side of things. So that's the challenge there. And in terms of the fund we have, we do really focus also on brands that are consumer facing, that are technology driven. So you can have a product that has less borders or no borders in some cases. So that way we believe we believe we have a well-rounded fund. That way we work with physical products, but also like to see there's an innovative technology slant to it, or as a separate company that can support the companies in the portfolio.
Interesting. I guess, Dinesh, as a follow-up, and I want to get both of your takes on this, there's been a lot of talk about it. I haven't necessarily seen a lot of action, but do you think manufacturing in particular will come back to the U.S. In a significant way?
I think it's possible. The motivations for manufacturing to come back are much higher than they have been in the past, when private companies were looking at addressing low-cost manufacturing to improve their operating and gross margins. The difference in this time is it's not simply about reducing costs, it's about keeping costs down while concurrently introducing resilience. And so with dependencies on international supply chains, you might have reduced your costs, but if your supply chain is broken, it doesn't matter. And so resiliency means having the ability to overcome some of these challenges while at the same time having either local manufacturing or accessible manufacturing within the confines of a jurisdiction that don't limit your ability to produce and meet consumer demand. And so if that means incrementally higher costs for the company producing the goods and services, and correspondingly potentially higher costs for consumers, it might be a reasonable trade-off to consider that. Now, ultimately, this is a policy question about what type of incentives both states and the federal government might have for encouraging local manufacturing. But I think that similar to other areas of dearth of investments, for example, in education around trade schools, the cost of The cost of getting a handyman in our neighborhood suggests that maybe I should have a different career, because the hourly wage for really important trade skills has sort of disappeared. And arguably, it's an indictment of the evolution of our education system, along with many other things. So I'll use that analogy to manufacturing. I think we're beginning to become stale, and we've lost the ability to institutionalize a lot of that knowledge generation after generation through companies, systems, and research in manufacturing. And just because lower cost labor exists internationally doesn't mean you can't produce efficiently in the US. I mean, the classic example is the Toyota production system, which was applied to Toyota, but then imported to the US and applied to US plants to produce vehicles at nearly the same cost as an international market. So sometimes it's about great processes, knowledge centers, people, and effectiveness of the system, and not simply about labor rates. You can pay fair wages and give opportunity to those that are disenfranchised while still creating learning and growth for an industry, and at the same time doing it in a homegrown way. My bigger concern is if everyone did this, we would start becoming isolationist. And the fact that globalization has led to a dramatic decrease in poverty globally means that if we all start becoming isolations and stop relying and coordinating with one another, it means less interdependency. I think that creates other existential risks on Earth, and also perhaps creates actually higher costs of goods because you don't have specialization and trade to drive outcomes where it makes sense to do so. So there's a lot of other ramifications using manufacturing as the guinea pig here, that if you only focus domestically, you miss the broader picture internationally for cooperation and a better Earth.
So in other words, it's complicated, but it's a good, good run through. Per, you're heavily involved in so-called hard goods, as you mentioned, and obviously, manufacturing stuff. What, if any, trends are you seeing? Do you think we'll see it pull back in the U.S. in any significant way?
I do like the idea of manufacturing in the United States, but I also know the regulation makes it very, very, very difficult. So the way to kind of compete with that contrarian is automation and technology again. And I think that's all good, but I'm a firm believer in that we should find a reasonable way to have global trade. And my hope is that the pandemic is teaching us to be way more concerned about more people's well-being rather than just for profit. So I think it has a little bit to do with this. What's the social impact here of each of the companies that we are involved in? But I really encourage and hope that global trade will not get such a bad name, and that we can find a better way to work with manufacturers in different parts of the world. But I do welcome manufacturing coming to the United States, but some stuff they just refuse to make here for regulatory reasons and EPA and what have you. And that creates a challenge, because if we're all looking at a regulation that is so tight here, then it's going to be abused elsewhere. So there's always that ugly side to manufacturing, especially when it comes to pollutants. And I'm very torn on that, because I do understand the power of global manufacturing, but I also really feel that we are losing so much creativity in ingenuity in how to make things. And I think that's a lost, almost like a lost trade, if you will. And I'm hoping some of that is, and I see it's coming back a little bit.
Well, it's definitely something to watch. And I think a lot of the unintended disruption coming from this period, some of it will be good, some of it will be bad, some of it will just be different. But I want to take a step back, Dinesh. A lot of our listeners and viewers are members of the Anderson family, including some of the startups at the Accelerator. And I know from having worked with them, from the beginning of this situation, that certainly initially there was a little bit of a deer in the headlights moment of like, really, am I starting a company during a global pandemic? And I've contended over time that if you've got a good idea, the best time to start a business is right now, no matter what's going on. Whether it was 9/11 or the Great Recession, as we all know, a lot of great companies are born out of tough times. So I'm wondering if you agree, and if so, what would be your advice to an early stage startup at this time?
I definitely agree. So some of the best companies have been formed coming out of recessions because early stage startups, their lifeblood is the people, the available time they have, and their money, their cash, and their balance sheet. And I think they're far more efficient with their cash during these really difficult times. One of the most interesting things that we've observed out of the pandemic is when we moved into shutdown, both in the U.S. and then we've seen it in other countries, is the whisper quietness of the world and the human footprint that we'd left through all of the pollution, the noise, the impact on the earth. And I think Per just referenced it. But the result is that we got to see a window into a world where humans aren't destroying the earth. Birds coming back on trees in my neighborhood where they're chirping all the time, and roads that were empty and squirrels crossing across the street without fear of getting run over, and clean air, constantly clean air where you could see into the horizon. And I think it reminded us of the importance of sustainability in the world. And I think some of the most interesting companies that are going to be formed over the next decade are going to be focused on sustainability. Whether it's energy efficiency, carbon reduction, reduction of waste. I think this is a big area of focus. One, there's a global movement to address this because the impact on Earth, if we don't address it, are frankly catastrophic. And number two, you can actually build companies that are for-profit, that are private, for-profit, enduring businesses that can have a real impact on Earth. I think Tesla's obviously demonstrated that to some extent, but that's a poster child for a consumer brand and an industry brand. But there's a lot of companies behind the scenes that are going to change the world in sustainability. So I'd encourage entrepreneurs to look at sustainability seriously. We got a window of what the world would look like when nature has a chance to fight back. Let's encourage that and create a healthy ecosystem for the world. And it's a great time to start a company because entrepreneurs are going to be more disciplined and efficient.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I was joking at the beginning of this that Mother Nature must be so confused right now because everything was changing. Everyone was home and we weren't leaving that footprint. And I don't know if you recall, but at the beginning of the lockdown here in LA, I think it poured the first few days. And my suspicion was like the earth just needed to breathe a little bit, and we were finally giving it a breather. So I think it's a really important point of where to look for some of these startup opportunities. Per, same question to you for early stage startups at the accelerator and beyond. What's your advice trying to navigate something like this that none of us have ever seen before?
Many of the businesses that start up, I'm sure at this moment, or I should step back, businesses that started in the last 6 months, they probably didn't think of the pandemic at all. So the idea that the pandemic hit, I don't think really is going to affect them in any shape or form. All I know is for companies to start up, they have to just live and breathe whatever it is they believe in. And then they just have to surround themselves with the right people and really find the right customer. And once they find the right customer, I call it the movements, then it's just a matter of put some fire on that movement in the different communication platforms that pop up. 1 year it's YouTube, the next year it's Instagram, the year after that it's TikTok. So to me, I think there's no better time than ever to start a business right now, assuming that either by luck or by design it fits where we are at the moment, but more so, is this going to be a good entry into a newer world? And that's always, the big question mark. And especially as an investor, we always try to look into the future. What will this look like in 3 years if everything plays out? And meaning, what's the timing of this? And sometimes people are lucky to have the wind in the sails. Other times they have it against them. It just takes a little longer before that tipping point. So I echo that almost any time is good to start a business, but when it is like this, I think so many people are so deer in headlight that this is a perfect time because you may get the ear of very powerful advisors or investors, where before they didn't have the time of day to help support startups that, for the most part, are started by younger entrepreneurs.
So Dinesh, one of the things I've been focused on from the beginning is this idea of pivoting and the importance of pivoting, figuring out where your customers are now, how you can serve them best during this crazy time. Is there something, if you're a manufacturer, is there something that you can shift to? For example, I talked a few weeks ago with a distiller in upstate New York. In the normal times, they make bourbon and gin and things like that, and they shifted to hand sanitizer. And in good times with the liquor, they were making about 4,000 bottles a week, and now they're making over 70,000 bottles of hand sanitizer, and the demand just doesn't seem to go away. Not everyone can make that direct pivot, but I'm wondering first, any clever pivots that you've seen out there, whether it's with some of your portfolio companies or whatever, and also personally, how have you sort of pivoted during this time?
Yeah, good question. So agree that pivots are instrumental in sort of the company's journey. Recognizing them is the hardest thing to do. Sometimes you have lead metrics that are encouraging, but you have lag metrics that aren't. And the question is, do you have product market fit with an early stage company, or do you need to be able to just make incremental changes and continue at it till the market evolves to the product or solution you're bringing to market? I think it's very different for a lifestyle company as opposed to a hockey stick growth venture-backed business. So in the example of putting out hand sanitizer, it's unclear if a company making alcoholic beverages that pivots to hand sanitizer is truly a venture-backed business. That might make more sense to raise money through debt, build a lifestyle business that throws off tons of cash flow. It's great for the family business or the entrepreneur that's building it. It solves a big problem in the market, could throw off tons of cash flow, but may not be the type of business with the exit potential that venture capital investors might look for. Unless there's an appetite there. For venture-backed businesses, we've seen pivots become instrumental into large businesses because they had the foresight to take that decision, and even though they had conviction with what they were already doing, recognizing that something might not be working and the opportunity cost was significant, and better allocating resources elsewhere was more important. I think many businesses in the gaming space came out of large pivots. My recollection is Discord was a very different business versus where it is today. I'll give you a personal example. The team I had at Hatch focused on building a product in Los Angeles, was building a product called Cardify, and it was focused on solving local merchant loyalty for small businesses to bring customers back and manage their workflows. That was a compelling business, and there are businesses in that space. But through the hackathon that we had in February 2012, we came up with the concept of Matchbox. When we were going through that process, we realized there's a lot of potential. In fact, I in my internal teams, I gave it the top award, and I had to make a tough decision coming out of TechCrunch Disrupt Finals in May with my head of product, Sean, to say, let's refocus this on the Tinder opportunity, or we could have kept working on Cardify, and that was a tough decision. And so we reallocated the resources to a bigger opportunity, and that was a fundamental pivot. That wasn't a product or marketing pivot. It was actually an entire business pivot using a really talented team to go after a new opportunity. So I think pivots have been instrumental into the modern day outcomes of generational defining companies. And so if companies or startup teams don't recognize when to pivot, it could mean the difference between success and failure. And I think more and more, as we're learning more lessons about institutionalizing what to look out for and when to pivot, it's making businesses perform radically better and decreasing the statistical likelihood of failure.
Yeah, and Per, I think that's a great reminder that some of the things that we're forced to do in response to this are actually not bad, and in some cases good for us. I'm wondering any creative pivots that you're seeing, or just your thoughts on the overall concept.
Well, being the older guy in the room, to me, pivot, first of all, it's a skateboard move. So excuse my occupational hazard there, but pivot to me back in the day is just a strategic shift. I'm not a fan of pivot because that means the conviction may be faltering a little bit. It doesn't work so well in lifestyle. It's probably very instrumental in tech if something isn't working at all. that means I made a bad bet. So to me, I don't like the word pivot. I think it's very dangerous. If you're going to build something that has heart and creates something that you're going to like for the rest of your life. So for me, I'm very leery of, and I'm hoping I'm still just an emerging manager. I've not made an investment yet where it's been a pivot the way it's described in the business media. I think pivot, if you define it as being smart strategically, then I'm all for the word, but I just have this bias of pivot means 180, or you do something that, oh no, I don't like this, I'm going this way now. So it's a little bit hard for me. It's almost like, yeah, I like hamburgers. Oh no, now I like chicken. And that means it's like, where is this person? What does he like? What's he doing? What's his conviction? So I pour a little bit cold water on that, but I totally get the concept, and I understand in tech it can be life or death. But in lifestyle, you got to move a little slower. You can add a product category, or you can license into something very far left rather than doing it yourself. And then you can kind of experiment with it. Oh, this category is doing really good. Oh, maybe we should do that ourselves. So to me, it's more of a word of strategy, a little bit slower. Pivot is something quick. And again, I know in tech, you have to work much faster than in lifestyle.
Well, that's a really great counterpoint, and I'm glad you raised it, because, you know, the idea is I guess pivoting smartly or logically, and not, you know, completely doing a 180 to get back to skateboarding. Dinesh, I want to talk about tech. You're a tech guy, of course, and you've seen a lot. Tech has obviously been a lifeline for us during this situation. I mean, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation. We wouldn't be able to stay as connected as we can. We'd be bored out of our minds, you know, without great content to watch and things like that. So tech has obviously been helpful in this situation, but I'm wondering if you see any unintended consequences. You know, will this experience get better? Will we feel like we're more in person down the road? Do you think we'll see new ideas? And what's the downside of us not having this conversation in person and not being able to for a while?
So you're asking about the long-term impact of COVID and our ability to connect face-to-face as opposed to digitally. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, that's one piece of it. Yeah.
So I think we'll be back to physical human connections on multiple dimensions. One is COVID, or a lingering version of COVID. It could be other strains, or our society's collective ability to overcome the virus, whether it's through vaccines or you know, sufficient opt-in of actually taking a vaccine, because there's a large anti-vax movement that exists in the United States and elsewhere. I think we'll be able to overcome most of it, but it's a question of time horizons. If we start dealing with human timescales, of course we're going to overcome it. We've overcome the Spanish flu. We've overcome many plagues that have impacted humanity. But when we're talking about the next 2 or 3 years, it's an infinitesimally small period of time in our time on Earth. So I think it'll be a challenging couple of years. I think there'll be more virtual and digital interactions during that period of time. Nobody has a crystal ball to know how long this is going to last or what the nature of the impact is going to be, but it is changing the way we work. We're more reliant on technology. We're more reliant on communication and collaboration in digital formats. We're more reliant on machines, in some cases, to provide data to make decisions without having to coordinate or collaborate with other people physically or digitally. But I do think it will prompt innovation in how we collaborate with each other. You know, the virtual is an example of a rudimentary piece of technology. But imagine bringing virtual reality and augmented reality into collaboration and coordination of video calls. So it feels, I describe it like the Jedi Council, where the holograms of all the different Jedis are sitting together. And it's like you're sitting in a virtual room, but you're not really there. That's going to become a reality. There's no question about it. It's a question of when. And is there willingness to pay, and do those become large, enduring companies in the future? But I think our reliance on technology is increasing. I think there's a Black Mirror effect of that. I'd like to see more human connection and interactions that we had before cellular phones and TVs and technologies, so that we're connecting as human beings on an emotional and physical level without relying on technology to be the bridge. But I think the future of the world, it's very clear to me that it'll be a hybrid of both. As long as we keep our humanity intact and recognize the importance of that physical connection and weave it into everything we do, I think we'll be perfectly fine.
I think that's a really great and an important point, especially about the long view of this, that, when you're in the moment, it feels like forever, but in the grand scheme of things, like you said, a 2 or 3 year period. And, we just kind of have to hunker down and learn and adapt. Per, I want to move over to your industry, your field, which is largely lifestyle. How has that been impacted, given that we don't really have lives right now, or certainly not living them, as we once did? And of course, we'll get back to it. But what does that mean for the lifestyle space? And what would be your advice to some of the accelerator startups in the lifestyle space?
Well, when it comes to apparel or footwear, or the more common notion of lifestyle, it's kind of on pause. We're not going out to bars as much. We're not traveling to the beach so much at the moment. So it's very, very challenging for those types. But lifestyle is also about how do we live better and work better. So if you broaden the lifestyle to that, which of course we are as a fund and investor, it's anything from we invested in a buy now, pay later company, and that's something that the Gen Y and Gen Z really have use of, in terms of it's a cool brand. I can buy something and get payments spread out a little bit. That's lifestyle. So for us, lifestyle is basically anything consumer facing that's going to make it more fun or easier to work and live. And if you broaden it that way, I think the pause, it just makes us think a little bit more, but it also provides an opportunity to see what other technology, and AR, I think XR is a great space. For me, I'm excited about some of the games coming out, and also in the workplace, the way Dinesh described it. I look forward to some of those technologies. AR, I think, is the one that will have the most impact on how we buy furniture, which is already out, to more and more everyday stuff at home, as well as at work, whether we're here or in an office. So I actually welcome this kind of pause, because it really makes us look up and take a deep breath and really think about, okay, how are some of these things going to affect my work and life? And if it's going to do it in a positive way, then we want to hear about it.
That's great. That's great. Dinesh, as a tech guy, I imagine you're a data guy as well. And I'm wondering, based on what you're seeing, have there been noticeable shifts in consumer behavior, for example?
Well, there have been lots of shifts in consumer behavior. Are you referring to the last 4 months during COVID?
I guess I should have clarified. So yes, of course, the last 4 months, and obviously there have been changes, but I guess ones that you think will carry over long term. So for example, this is more on the manufacturing side, but I read a report recently about how a lot of consumer brands basically are scaling back the number of offerings that they have so that they can streamline manufacturing, and how, we don't need 35 different types of toilet paper. We just need toilet paper. We don't need 50 flavors of potato chips, even though I love flavored potato chips. So it's sort of scaling back on the production side. So I'm wondering if you're seeing anything similar on the consumer side.
We are, and I've heard the same things on the manufacturing side. I think that has to do with operational efficiencies. You want your blended average margins to be at a certain place, and addressing the long tail of SKUs or products for consumers can be compelling in terms of revenue growth, but ultimately might create a lower quality business in blended average margins across your product lines. For consumer behavior, we're seeing lots of changes. One is something that's been a theme of this entire conversation is reliance on digital technologies for communication, whether it's collaborating through video conferencing for work, whether it's reconnecting with friends during COVID to see if people are okay. Those could be affinity groups from your high school alumni group, or it could be college fraternities and sororities, or people you were in athletics with, to grad school, or to previous colleagues from work. I think people felt the need for human connection. And especially during lockdowns and shelter in places, I think that they were using all sorts of technologies to reconnect. So that was the big silver lining. There's many other silver linings, but that was one of them during COVID. So I think communication technologies saw dramatically higher usage, acquisition, and engagement, largely organically. The other interesting consumer behavior is if you look at our comfort with products and services that relied on collaborative consumption during COVID, I think that's declined a little bit because we're worried about the virus. And so, what's your comfort staying in somebody else's home in an Airbnb if you don't know if everything's been sanitized or they haven't changed to a higher MERV rating filter with UVC, and they're not cleaning the air because everything points to the virus, perhaps, although I'm not an epidemiologist, perhaps being a little bit more airborne, the droplets in the air. How is air being cleaned? So are you feeling comfortable with technology services that drive collaborative consumption with other peers or other people during this environment? And again, if you look at it from that very short-term time horizon, I think it can be a headwind. But longer term, I think it doesn't change human behavior to try new products and services to make their lives better, to improve the human condition. And that could be in sustainability. It can be in products and services that make our lives better, whether it's consumer packaged goods, recreational lifestyle choices for going on vacation, or having products and services that you use at home or that you use at work. I think there's innovation constantly happening in every one of these areas, and they're all going to sort of overcome or bypass the limitations we have as a result of the last few months in COVID.
Yeah, that makes sense. And the name of this podcast sort of has a double meaning. Accelerate, meaning, obviously accelerate your business, but I think this situation is accelerating a lot of things in the wider world as well. Some good, some bad, some here to stay, some temporary. Per, I imagine your take is a little more anecdotal. You're a person-to-person guy, and you have a lot of great relationships across the business spectrum. Any consumer changes, especially someone being in so many consumer brands like you are, that you're noticing?
Well, before I answer that, I wanted to tell a short little story. I love brands, I love choices. And I remember walking down grocery stores, let's say it was 15 years ago, and you would see miles of 3 beer brands. Of course I'm exaggerating, but not very many beer brands. There was, craft beer had a little blip in the 90s, then it disappeared. But to my delight, all of a sudden you see the section of craft beer in the major grocery stores grow. That's when I get excited, because the beer is still beer, but people want something new. The new generation wants something new. And the new generation, which is usually 18 to 35, they're the ones that always build the next brand. And of course, we want to try to figure out what that is. So I'm hoping there's some fluidity and creativity so that everything doesn't get so stale where there's one store, I'm not going to name names, and there's one product, where it's all private label. That's, to me, I want to try to fight that by helping entrepreneurs and sentiment of consumer behavior changing, because the new generation want to put their mark. I'm not going to be like my sister. I'm not going to be like my brother. I want to put a mark. And that stems from skateboarding. If you have 3 siblings, the first person skates, the second person does something completely different, but then the third, the youngest, gets back to skateboarding. So you miss the cycle, and they're going to have different ideas of what's cool. And of course, all along, we have creativity on content, which is another big area for us, creativity on tech. And if you can lace that in with that new kid that's going to make a mark on the world, they are going to embrace the new and not know of the old. I'm from the old school of print. I'm from the old school, you actually go to trade shows. And I'm hoping there's going to be some sort of a virtual new trade show with this new technology where the Zoom and Zoom-like services are getting more, more better and provide more features within the app, if you will. So I'm still always optimistic, especially when I tell that beer story. Because I thought, okay, there's going to be these 3 brands, and you can get any type of flavor. And if you want something special, you have to go to this really special beer store in Costa Mesa that covers some beer from Europe. So that's always my hope, that everything doesn't get so stale where the choices becomes less and less, because that is definitely a risk when you have a convenience of clicking one button through one retailer. And it's a challenge for physical goods.
Well, I look forward to joining both of you for a beer sometime soon when we get the all clear, and maybe a socially distanced one in the meantime. Um, Dinesh, in addition to being, as I said at the top, a CEO, investor, entrepreneur, you're also an academic. You teach at Anderson. And I'm wondering, both for current students and just entrepreneurs at large, what's the importance of still learning during an uncertain time, and what advice would you have to them, beyond their classes, virtual or otherwise? How can you be learning from this situation?
I couldn't underscore more what you're saying, the importance of learning. Learning can come in formal methods through our institutionalized educational system. It can come from our parents. It can come through osmosis from our friends and family and the people we spend time with in their affinity groups. But one of the things that I noticed comes up is that there's an increased use of technology to make things easier. And of course, we augment what we learn through online courses. You could do everything from, Khan Academy sells my classmate, and what he's done is incredible for the world, all the way to, taking trade school courses or educational courses in a topic that you're interested in to advance your education. All of that is happening. I think what's more interesting, perhaps to talk about or share is advice for Anderson students as well as other universities that I teach at. I think because technology's made things easier, people have gotten comfortable with easy. And the fact is, life is hard and life can be unfair, unfortunately, sometimes. And the more difficult things you've gone through in life, it fundamentally changes your grit, your ability to overcome adversity, and your outlook. Maybe even manages your expectations. So when you exceed your expectations, you're happier in life. I've just had a lot of difficult things happen in my life and my family's life. And I think once you've dealt with some of those difficulties, that in itself is an education. And I would remind people to sometimes take the road less traveled or the more difficult one, because it's where most of the personal growth comes from. I'll give you an example. This is not one of those difficult times, but rather a crossroads. When I was finishing my MBA, I was fortunate to have a few opportunities at different companies for a full-time job. And I instead took one, not in the US, but I moved to Korea to go work at Samsung Electronics. Actually in the chairman's office at Samsung Corporation, but mostly with electronics. And I didn't speak Korean, so I started learning Korean before I got there. I was taking Korean immersive courses while I was living in Seoul. And that was not the most obvious point A to B direct route to achieving necessarily the objectives, but it was the most personal growth I could go through with respect to learning that actually had second and third order effects that were much more helpful in my life later on and helped influence and change some of the decisions I had taken. So I would encourage everyone to utilize all the formal learning and training and educational institutions we have, and ones that are opt-in and elective that are online today. But figure out, maybe through an introspective look, where you can grow as a human being. And if you have shortfalls or areas you want to challenge yourself, when next time you're at a crossroads, think about the choices you're making and can you grow personally? Can you put yourself in uncomfortable situations where when you see light at the end of that tunnel, when you overcame any adversity, it just makes you so much stronger to encourage you to have the confidence to do the things you want to do later on in life. And then those values ultimately get instilled and passed on to other generations, whether it's your own kids or whether it's through mentorship. So I think this is really important, but it doesn't get talked about. I would say maybe explore the road less traveled and maybe sometimes the one that's harder.
Really great points. I couldn't agree more. And, I remember to this point of persistence and resilience, early on in the pandemic, I read a column, sports column about Chris Evert, the former tennis player. And, I grew up playing tennis. I grew up watching her, and I knew she was a great champion. I didn't know that match-wise, I believe she's the winningest tennis player, male or female, in history. And the column got into, and it was against the backdrop of the pandemic, that she wasn't the strongest, she wasn't the tallest, she didn't have the fastest serve, but she would just grind down her opponents. And it got to this idea of just being there, meeting the challenge head on and just being persistent. And I'm seeing a ton of that in the entrepreneurial world, which I think is encouraging and speaks to your point. Per, similar version of the same question about learning. I've known you for a while now, and you're like a sponge. You just love absorbing information and new ideas. And if something new comes your way, you want to explore and learn about it. How do you learn on a personal level? And again, what would be your advice to accelerator startups, Anderson students, as they keep learning through this journey?
Well, how I learn myself, I just look online and see what interests me. I look at some books and watch movies and look at old movies. And then I am this kind of strategy fiend. I just try to think of fun things to combine things. And that could be combining two people to network together, to get to know each other, to a business idea. But it's very business focused because I love it, I live it, and I have this zest for learning, but it's very business focused. So if you ask me a question about Shakespeare, I'm not the guy. If it was skateboarding and business, certainly lifestyle and culture, then I'm very comfortable, and I love everything about the global part of the world. Coming from Sweden, you have to think global day one, because Sweden is such a small country. And coming here, America is so massive, but then again, only 8.7% of the people on this earth live here. So the world is big, and I learn from people from all over the world. I think that's my favorite, having been able to travel, but now you can travel nicely on the internet. And I think with VR, you're going to be able to learn how you learn Korean. You can now have a Korean instructor, and he can show you. You don't even have to be in Seoul, but he can show you all these things in the house. How do you say this in Korean? You can show famous buildings. So I think the technology is just speeding up what we can learn, but we're also, of course, challenged with how much time or how many hours do we have in a day. We have to, of course, make sure we also have as much compassion for the people around us, the loved ones. And I think that's the most important part, to really think about the people that are close to you, that are supporting you, and that are by your side, along with having this, I got to do this, I got to work. You got to balance it. And that, to me, is the best advice I can give. You just have to find what you like, but also be very conscious of who are around you that really supports you through thick and through thin.
Love it. You're both obviously friends of Anderson and the accelerator, and you're both based in Southern California, and you've been at your respective industries for a long time. Dinesh, starting with you, I'm just wondering, from your vantage point, what role has the accelerator, and does the accelerator continue to play in the LA entrepreneurial ecosystem?
I think it plays an important role. I'm glad it was founded at Anderson. It creates another channel for entrepreneurs, or especially first-time entrepreneurs, to get advice, counsel, guidance, best practices in that early days of the formation of their company. Oftentimes, first-time founders don't fully appreciate that a company or a startup is really just a hypothesis. And the process of proving or disproving that hypothesis is bringing it to market and commercializing it. And there's 1,000 decisions that happen in the process of doing that. It's riddled with pitfalls, and you try to increase your statistical likelihood of success by reducing some of those bad decisions or overcoming some of those pitfalls. And having an accelerator or mentorship for the Anderson students is a great way to do that. And this is true even for some of the early founders that aren't Anderson students that join an Anderson founder that get involved in the accelerator program. So if you can get access to those resources, it increases your likelihood of success. And so I think Anderson's accelerator will probably play an instrumental part in helping develop the LA tech ecosystem, acknowledging that it's come a long way so far over the past 2 decades.
Appreciate that. Well, Per, same to you. You've attended several showcases and have met with some of the accelerator founders. What's your take on all this?
I'm surprised it took that long for UCLA to do that. I think UCLA is very humble. They're very good at promoting their sports. And I think this is a great example. This is a great start of promoting business. And, I'm such a LA, UCLA fan. I want to wave that flag. So to me, that the infrastructure there is great. This could be ways to leverage IPs that perhaps are kind of dormant within the UCLA system. So to me, that's super exciting. And selfishly, it's super inspirational. When I went there, you see these companies, you see the energy, and it makes me feel really, really good. And that could also then potentially be something where we can come in if it's a good fit, where they believe we can help them and leverage our experience and network to make them great. So to me, it's a win-win. But first and foremost, I think we have underutilized the power of all the students and faculty. So I think this could be a very good start of additional programs that I know is underway or is existing. I don't know all the programs, but I think it's very, very important for LA to have this because more and more money is coming in because of the Olympics. LA will be one of the most recognized cities in the world. I think it's probably number one, now maybe beating out even New York. And even on the investment side, I think this is part of making LA maybe even have more money inflow than Silicon Valley in the next 10 years. Who knows? I'm excited. I'm competitive. Let's win.
I love it. And yeah, I've as I mentioned, I've been continuing with my summer sessions with the latest cohort, and I've just been really impressed with the resilience of the founders at the accelerator and all throughout Anderson. And this show was born out of an idea we were working on just prior to the pandemic. We wanted to start doing some in-person fireside chats, and we almost didn't skip a beat. We said, let's just take it virtual, and the response has been great. So appreciate the kind words about the accelerator. I want to deliberately get off topic and have a little fun here. Just things that I've been curious about with both of you. Dinesh, you co-founded Tinder famously. Just wondering, and I asked this as someone who's trying to navigate it myself. I'm sure you still keep an eye on the market. What do you make of online dating in the age of COVID?
I don't spend that much time on that on that domain anymore. I get pitched startups in the space almost daily. That's how often companies are being formed that are trying to address the dating market with their product differentiation or a different view on it. It's a testament to Tinder and perhaps a couple other companies in this space that they've become as big as they were, because that wasn't obvious the day we started the company. But the network effect has been defensible at scale. So I think there'll be continued evolution in this space. Obviously, the perfect example of that is profiles have moved to video. They're more multimedia and interactive. But when it's hard to meet people physically, digital social discovery is a natural evolution of that. And we were fortunate to have created that business, in advance, so it could scale and become a larger business and be ready for the market when this awful pandemic hit. But the silver lining is, I think it means that a lot of the technologies we're investing in today, whether it's in social discovery or it's in other areas, are going to be thinking about that existential risk of what if this happens or what if that happens. And so technology hopefully will be a buffer in improving people's quality of life when something unexpected happens. I just want everyone to keep in mind the Black Mirror effect of being too reliant on technology, and also not only the dependency, but what it does to us as human beings. We need to work really hard to stay connected without becoming completely dependent on technology, because I don't think that's a world any of us want to live in.
I couldn't agree more. Per, a fun question from your past. I always bring this up because I think it's the coolest thing about you, and there are a lot of cool things about you, but a lot of people don't know that back in your skating days in the 80s, you actually did some of the skateboarding stunt scenes in one of my favorite movies, Back to the Future. I love the story behind this. I was hoping you could share, for a few minutes what that experience was like, and I know you look back on it fondly.
Oh yeah, so back when I first came here and skated, I made, of course, no money. I was scrubbing the floors at a dry cleaner, and on the weekends, I would do street performance on the boardwalk in Venice Beach. And a buddy of mine, we would like, hey, come and watch us skateboard. And he would put out a hat, and of course, you shoot for the quarters and the dollars. And then one day there was a business card in there, and it was from Bob Gale, and it said, "Call me." So we called him and got pawned on to the stunt coordinator. "Yeah, we're going to make a movie. It's called Back to the Future. Do you want to be in it?" And of course, a movie doesn't mean nothing when you just hear it. It's like, "Oh, that sounds cool." And so we participated, and it was a 2-week work. It was a lot of fun. Got to meet Steven Spielberg and, of course, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, the producer. And now, of course, 30 years later, I always joke that I picked the wrong business. I should have been either better looking or a better stuntman, because I get a quarterly check from Universal every quarter. It's not big. It wasn't like I was Michael J. Fox, but that's not the point. It was just so fun to be part of something like that. And it's so nice to know now that the movie, even to this day, is so liked around the world. So yeah, that was my stint in Hollywood.
I love it. And you told me every time you get that check, you take your wife out for a nice dinner, which I think is the best part.
In fact, we're going out tonight. So
I love it. I love it. Just to wrap up here, and again, I really appreciate all the time and insights. Dinesh, as we've talked about, this situation has forced people and companies to do things that they weren't doing prior, that we've had to adapt, we've had to pivot. And again, I've made the argument that they're not all bad. Sometimes it's things we should have been doing. I've made the analogy that unfortunately, the same way the virus itself is exposing people's underlying conditions, I think it's doing the same for entrepreneurs and for businesses, that if you were weak in a certain area prior to this, you had to adapt and sort of fix that. So I'm wondering, what's one thing that you've had to change during this process that you're actually happy will stick with you on the other side?
I've changed a number of things. I'd say the first is that I was traveling almost every week, largely because I was spending time personally with board meetings or entrepreneurs, teaching at universities, whatever it might be. And, there's 24 hours in a day, and you can't be in Boston having a meeting and at the same time be in Los Angeles with your kids. And I've been grounded and I haven't gotten on a plane in the last almost 4 months. And the idea that I've been getting to be with my kids every night and put them to bed, sometimes I'm on a call, but the idea of being able to do that has been incredible. It's been life-changing in the relationship with my children. I was always trying really hard to take red eyes, get back, and be as home with them as much as I could. But the idea of not having that interruption and having to explain to my daughter, who occasionally would have a tear in her eye as an 8-year-old when I would have to leave, and then be excited when I would come home, to just have continuity and that steadfast presence, I think has been really important to me. So that's something I'm going to try to continue moving forward with. Doesn't mean I'm not going to travel as we get past this phase of the pandemic and safety in flying comes back to close to where we were before or surpasses it. But if I can do a meeting over Zoom, or I can do it virtually, or I can hop on a call, or we can handle it through other automation and collaboration processes, let's do that. And where we need to meet in person, we will. And so the silver lining for me is time with family.
That's great. That's great. And it's so nice to hear, and it's not the first time I've heard it, and I'm sure the family loves having you around more. And I think on a business level, one kind of related trend I've seen is because we're all Zoom people now, that a lot of companies that would have been reluctant to hire a remote worker in another city are suddenly all about it, because everyone's remote anyway at this point. So I think this is having a lot of silver linings, as you put it. Per, from your perspective, what's one change that you've been forced to make that you're actually, in hindsight, happy about?
My car is in the driveway. Love it. Again, it comes back to my LA meetings. Orange County is still Orange County. So that's selfishly very nice, not having to drive very much. But I do miss going out and meet people for lunches or sometimes dinner. I think I'm a social person. I enjoy people's companies and hearing their stories. So I do think I will go back to carefully to that at some point, and my car will be driving a little bit more. Fortunately, I don't fly super much anymore. I've had plenty of years flying both through my professional skateboard career and my business career. So I'm very fortunate that way. when I was the CEO, I always made sure everybody else traveled as much as I could. So I'm very luxurious in that situation. I'm here, my wife is home too, and our two sons are out. We're empty nesters. So not a whole lot of change, but I do like the Zoom capability and what technology can do. You know, and also in terms of the investing, we always talk about wanting to meet an entrepreneur, not just in a formal setting like this, but, you know, maybe over a beer or I don't play golf, so that's a bad example, but paddleboarding or something like that, because you see them in a different environment other than when they can be on their guard. That part is missing. So you have to take a little bit more of a risk if you want to make sure you want to work with a particular company. So that's the one trade-off that I know is going to be a little bit of a challenge moving forward as we start investing more and more.
Great note to end it on. Another spirited conversation with two great members of the UCLA Anderson family. Gentlemen, really appreciate your time today. I learned a lot. I know the audience did, and it's great to connect the two of you in the process of this. I want to thank our guests, Dinesh Moorjani and Per Welinder, two great entrepreneurs and valued members of the UCLA Anderson family. And I want to thank all of you for joining us. Stay safe, stay well. I'm Rod Kurz.
This podcast is produced by the Price Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at UCLA Anderson. Learn more about the Venture Accelerator at UCLA Anderson by searching our hashtag UCLA Entrepreneurs or visiting our website anderson.ucla.edu/accelerator.